This lecture is about the bony thorax. The bony thorax is basically our rib cage, but there's a lot of very interesting features about this particular structure that I wanted to go over with you. You do have a diagram about the bony thorax or of the bony thorax in your Google Classroom and in your packet. So be sure that you look through that diagram and color it so that you can be prepared to label the different parts of the bony thorax. So this structure is basically our chest and all the little bony parts that go with it. Some things that are included in the bony thorax, the thoracic vertebrae are considered part of it. And if you can look at the name thoracic and thorax, they go together. Obviously the ribs, but also we have the sternum. And we have a very important cartilage known as costal cartilage or costal cartilage that allows our rib cage to have some flexibility. Of course, we know that the bony thorax has some pretty important jobs of protection. It protects the heart, the lungs, and our major blood vessels that run in and out of our heart. The bony thorax also serves as a support mechanism for the shoulders and our upper appendages, which would be our arms. And it provides an attachment point for muscles of the neck, the back, the chest, as well as the shoulder. Now, in between each rib, there is a space that is known as the intercostal space. This has some muscle that runs through there, which of course is responsible for allowing the lift of our rib cage when we breathe, and then the depression of our rib cage when we exhale. They use the intercostal spaces. Sometimes you'll see them on television shows when they're putting in a chest tube. You'll hear them tell them to count to a certain intercostal space before they insert the chest tube. So you've heard of it before, especially if you ever watched any of these medical shows or if you're a fan of Grey's Anatomy. So the sternum is known as our breastbone. We learned the sternal region back at the very beginning. It is in the middle of our thorax. It looks like a dagger and it's a flat bone. It's about 6 inches long for all individuals. The sternum is made up of 3 parts. We have the manubrium, which is the very top, and it looks like a necktie. You have the body, which is the bulk of the sternum, and that's where the 2nd through 7th ribs attach to it. And then at the very bottom, there is a bony structure that is known as the xiphoid process. And this is an attachment point for a lot of abdominal muscles. It's cartilage when we're little, but then it changes to bone. So the ribs are pretty important because not only are they protecting things, but they just have very interesting structure. So we have 12 pair of ribs, so 24 in all, and each one of those ribs attached to one of our thoracic vertebrae. So each thoracic vertebrae, because remember there's 12 of them, each rib attaches to a thoracic vertebrae. So there's 2 ribs attached to each one of those vertebrae. They're divided into 2 types. We have what's known as true ribs, and then we have what's known as false ribs. So when you look at the top of the rib cage and you start with the very first pair, you'll see that the ribs get longer as they begin to go down the rib cage. When they get to around pair 7, you'll see that pair 8 begins to shorten. So they decrease in length from pair 8 to pair 12. And it's kind of gives your chest this rounded barrel structure because of the way that the ribs are lengthened. Our ribs are just typical bowed flat bones. And if you've ever eaten ribs before, you know what the bone looks like under the meat. So true ribs are the top 7 pair. So the superior 7 pair are called true ribs. The other name is vertebrosternal ribs, and you'll need to know both of those names. It gets its name because it's attached to the vertebrae, but it's also attached to the sternum, and so that's how they get that name, vertebrosternal. So if you're looking at your diagram and you count from the first set of ribs down, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are vertebrosternal or true ribs. The last 5 pair are called false ribs. Pairs 8, 9, and 10 are known as vertebrocostal chondral ribs. Vertebral because they attach to the vertebral column, but chondral because they attach via cartilage to the sternum. So it's an indirect attachment. And then pair 11 and 12 are also false ribs. They don't attach at all to the sternum. So because of that, they're sometimes given the name the floating ribs. So if you look at your diagram, you're going to see that right here, here's your sternum. There's the manubrium, the body, and then this is the xiphoid process. All this blue is your costal cartilage. And then if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, those are your true ribs, vertebrosternal. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are your false ribs. And the last two are sometimes called the floating ribs or vertebral ribs because they only attach to the vertebrae. So that's it for the bony thorax. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Be sure that you review your notes as well as your diagram. Thank you.